Yesterday, I spoke about how MSNBC on any of the shows on their network hasn't mentioned the U.S. role in the war in Yemen in over a year. Fair.org tracked it, and that's what they found, which is insane. But MSNBC found ways to do literally hundreds of segments on Stormy Daniels. In the immortal words of Ron Weasley, they need to sort out their priorities. Because if cable news wants to prove that they aren't state media, basically, they need to start covering stories like this. The ground where the wedding tent once stood was covered with children's slippers, broken musical instruments, pieces of festive clothing, and other detritus of destroyed lives. Teeth still attached to the jawbone lay near some tattered decorations. There is even some flesh left, said Elan Yahya, the bride's father, pointing at blackened shards hanging from a tree branch. An airstrike hit the wedding in the remote mountain village on April 23rd, killing 22 civilians, including 8 children, and injuring dozens, according to interviews with 17 villagers in late May. More than 3 years into Yemen's civil war, over 16,000 civilians have been killed and injured, the vast majority by airstrikes, the UN Human Rights Office estimates, adding that the figures are likely to be far higher. The deaths are continuing unabated, with as many as hundreds of casualties per month, despite assurances by a U.S.-backed regional coalition to better protect civilians amid mounting criticism within the United States and the international community. Children's slippers in broken ash with flesh hanging from trees. That is what the United States is doing right now. But Stormy Daniels, Russia, all goddamn day, every day. This needs attention. These stories. It's stomach churning. 16,000 civilians, conservatively estimated, have been killed in 3 years with the United States' backing. And for what? This is a proxy war between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's a game to them about geopolitical influence, and we picked a side in this bloody, senseless conflict and rivalry based on our own arbitrary alliances with the oppressive Saudi regime. Just because it isn't U.S. troops directly murdering these children and innocent people doesn't mean we don't have massive amounts of blood on our hands. Without us, the coalition of the UAE and Saudi Arabia wouldn't be able to commit these atrocities. That coalition, led by Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, is backing Yemen's exiled government in its conflict against the rebels known as the Houthis, who dominate the capital and the north. The United States is playing an essential role in the war, supporting the coalition with intelligence, refueling, technical assistance, and billions of dollars in bombs and other weaponry. The coalition is the only actor in the conflict that uses warplanes, mostly American and British-made fighter jets. The airstrikes have struck hospitals, schools, markets, motels, migrant boats, gas stations, even funeral gatherings, raising questions about the coalition's ability to abide by humanitarian laws, you think, that calls for civilians to be safeguarded. They are using our jets, our machinery. And this isn't by accident, this is purposeful. In fact, Donald Trump and the United States Senate, our government, actually ramped up the sale of arms to Saudi Arabia so they could continue doing more of this. The growing civilian casualties across Yemen have led to widespread denouncement of the U.S. role and calls in Congress to halt or regulate American weapon sales to Saudi Arabia, a close U.S. ally in the Middle East. Despite the concern, President Trump announced $110 billion in new arms sales last year to the kingdom, weapons that most analysts expect will be used in Yemen. After the Senate narrowly approved a $510 million first installment of precision-guided munitions to Saudi Arabia last June, the kingdom said it would launch a training program to reduce accidental targeting of civilians. But in the year since that announcement, civilian deaths were 7% more than the year prior, the UN data shows. In April alone, there were 236 civilians killed and 238 injured, the deadliest month this year so far. So the U.S. government was like, oh, Saudi Arabia promised it would stop killing civilians? Great! Problem solved! We can go home! Oh, but only after we give more and more arms to the Saudis. Trump proudly announced $110 billion in arms sales to them, and the Senate gave them an additional package of money, precision-guided munitions. Newsflash, if they're not trying to target civilians, they're not very precise. But they actually aren't avoiding civilians. They're literally targeting schools, hospitals. But the U.S. government, it doesn't care. The Saudis give us oil? Okay, blank check to them to use our planes and our ammo and our hardware to kill tens of thousands of civilians. Are the civilians blonde and blue-eyed? Oh, they're not. Okay, well then who gives a shit? Raytheon spokesman Michael Doble said the company does not comment on the military actions of our allies or customers. Its sales of munitions to Saudi Arabia, he said, were reviewed and approved by Congress, the Pentagon, and the State Department, and so reflect the foreign policy and national security interests of the United States government and are in compliance with U.S. law. It definitely reflects our interests, maybe not international law, but yeah, Raytheon doesn't condemn it. I wonder why. Shares of Raytheon jumped to an all-time high of $170.74 in midday trading on July 27, 2017, after the company said it was getting a boost from President Donald Trump. The military specialist hit a previous all-time high on May 22, 2017, when Trump signed a weapons deal with Saudi Arabia worth $350 billion. And that's how things work in Washington. Flesh hanging from trees, children's shoes scattered on the ground, tens of thousands dead. But Raytheon, they got to make an extra buck, so I guess it's all worth it.